He is another former quarterback and a left-handed one at that. He played at the University of Washington, played for the Seattle Seahawks in the National Football League. He's also a former broadcaster for Fox Sports, and now he is stepping into the wonderful world of high school football coaching. He is Brock Huard. Brock, welcome to the show.
A podcast nearly 30 years in the making, going back to the sands of Oahu, the Aloha Bowl in 1997, where you were on one sidelines in green and white. We were in our purples, Nick Saban on your sideline. And our team was pretty good that year when we
Yeah,
were
you were.
healthy. Yeah, that was a game we were finally healthy and took out a ton of frustration. But how about that, man? Almost 30 years ago, we were together in Hawaii on opposite sidelines.
I love that you bring that up and start the show that way. And I'm going to tell you what I remember about that game. And then I want to hear what your thoughts are because I've got a couple of recollections. There's not many, but a couple from that long ago. And number one, after the game was over, you started. I didn't start the game. I got some mop up duty late. But on the field, I heard somebody say, "Hey, lefty." And I turned around and it was you. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you wanted to say hello and good game to me just because we both share that commonality of being left handed quarterbacks. And number two, I want the listeners to know that I played for Nick Saban, and all that week in the hot Hawaii sun, it was full pads, full contact. And we heard these rumors that our opponents, the University of Washington, were riding around the city on scooters. They were practicing in shorts. They had a laid back, really comfortable, relaxing week. And then the result of the game is a blowout. We got our butts kicked. So I'm just interested, what was your perspective in
I
1997?
think both of those things are accurate. Yeah, there's not a lot of lefty quarterbacks, and there's even less of them now, Bill, because they're all pitching, which I should have probably done. And if my son were a lefty, he would be pitching and not playing quarterback. So I think that was one of those. Hey, there's that other rare animal. There's another southpaw QB. So that was number one, and then number two. We had lost the year before. We'd lost the previous two bowl games. So my redshirt year, we went and played in El Paso. I was redshirting. Older brother Damon was the QB, and we did that. We was like 10 days, full pads, absolute massacre of each other, and then went out and played Iowa, and no one wanted to play. Everyone was dead. The next year, we played in the Holiday Bowl versus Colorado in San Diego. Great game, back and forth, super fun. But even then, it was still pretty violent and physical. So Jim Lambright, our coach, I think took a page and said, "I'm not doing that again." We're in Hawaii. We had a lot of Polynesians on the team, a lot of guys from Hawaii. Yeah, luau's fun. It was not nearly as intense. And we were really good. Like that team that year, when healthy, could have played with anybody in the country. And we were finally healthy. And I think he could feel that, like, all right, just let the horses loose. We feel good. We're going to play good. And that was one of our best games, certainly in my time at Washington.
Yeah, no, it was one to remember for sure. And I, like you, had always watched the other lefties in the country on TV. There weren't many of them, but I know you were in the same mold as I was, being left-handed and being a pocket guy. Really appreciated the fact that you came up and at least said hello. And that's really one of my biggest memories of you because that was the only time we had any communication. But you're right. Here we are
Yep.
30 years later, and it's hard to even say that number out loud. But now we're chopping it up about old times. So I really appreciate you being here. And I wanted to start by asking about your time at Washington because you mentioned your older brother Damon, who went on to have a great career in the NFL as well. So tell the listeners a little bit what that's really as a college quarterback under the scrutiny, the pressure. Of course, there's injuries, which we don't have any control over.
Hmm.
How did you manage all of that as a young quarterback in college? And what did those early battles, maybe even ones that you didn't expect, teach you about mental toughness?
Yeah, this is cool timing today as well. Not only to reconnect with you after all these decades, but on my morning show, as we're taping this today, and on my morning show in Seattle, we had Seth Wickersham on, esteemed writer. He's going to have a book coming out here in September on the quarterbacks, and it's going to be awesome. There was a little blip that came out publicly about Bo Nix and Sean Payton's fascination with him and what attracted him to him. And we had this morning this just wide ranging 20-minute conversation about a lot of the psychology of quarterback and what is the demands of it and everything that goes into it. Probably, Bill, a lot of what you talk about on this podcast and the life of it. To go back to those years, I grew up about 45 minutes from Seattle, so that was my hometown team. My dad had an amazing quarterback. My dad was a high school coach and coached my brothers, all of us, and a guy by the name of Billy Joe Hobart. And you'll remember that name as a
Oh,
football
yeah.
guy. Some of the younger generation doesn't, but won a national title. It
Shared time with Mark Brunell, right? Another lefty.
Yes, he did. And Mark Brunell got hurt in the spring. It opened the door for Billy, and they went undefeated and won the national title with Don James in 91. Billy was my dad's quarterback that won a state title in 87. So that began some of the pipeline of our pretty esteemed high school that my dad built football program with a lot of guys that went to the University of Washington. Billy, Joe, Tom Gallagher, Damon, just a bunch, Dane Looker, Todd Elstrom, just a lot of guys that made that 50-minute journey. So it was very familiar to me, Bill. The playbook was very familiar. My dad incorporated a lot of the fundamentals of Don James and the system and familiarity. I'd started to go to games there when I was just 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, watching Billy and all the guys. Looking back at college, that was, it's never seamless. It's never easy. Football is really hard. The demands are really difficult, but there was a ton of familiarity right in my backyard to jump in and get going pretty quickly. Redshirt in my first year, and then got a chance to play there right away as a redshirt freshman.
I don't know about the playbook or any of that, but I had a chance to visit the University of Washington a few years back, and that place is just picturesque. Right on the
Yeah.
water, the stadium and the facilities and the campus right on the water. Boats, of course, if you haven't been there and you're interested, at least check out pictures online. It is a magical place. I really enjoyed it. So I can't imagine playing ball there as well. You did it, and of course, did it really well. And I want to expound a little bit on what you said about that conversation you had earlier today. Let's talk about being a quarterback a little bit and exactly what goes into that because it is such a unique position. And I want to ask you so much of a quarterback's growth really happens in silence. It's in the film
Mhm.
room or it's in the weight room. And I felt when I struggled, when we were getting our butts kicked, or whether I was being questioned either as to whether I was really the leader of the team, I don't feel or didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it because there's no other position on the team where you can say that guy's also the starting quarterback. So I didn't feel like anybody really had a perspective into what I was going through in those tough times. So, what was that like for you, especially transitioning from high school, even though you had a strong background with brothers who played and
Mhm.
a dad that coached? But that transition for me was a huge wake up call and at times was really lonely. Of course, you want all the credit and the glory when things are going well, but when things aren't going well, talk to me about those dark, lonely moments for you.
Yeah. I was fortunate, Bill, that when I played in 96 and against you in 97, as I said, the supporting cast was phenomenal. Like you knew it then, but like now looking back at the Olin Kreutzes, the Benji Olsons, the Corey Dillons, man, I was surrounded by such great players. And the game is never easy, but to go back to those years, we ran the ball, we played great defense, and I got to just throw it deep and play to my strength and my talent. Really from a QB, and we talk about fit a lot with quarterbacks, especially in the NFL. There's very few that can go anywhere and fit. Most of us need, through our skills, our limitations, whatever, to be in the right environment with the right coaches, the right people, the right scheme. And I was that my first couple years and had a great supporting cast. And then my last year, they all graduated and moved on. And I came back to school. Again, not to harken back to 1997 Aloha Bowl that no one cares about. But what's funny is I was talking to agents at that time because it was after that was my redshirted. So after my third year, legally talking to Lee Steinberg and those guys, and went into that game thinking, man, this might be my last college game. And I was free. I probably played that game as free and easy as any game in my college career because I was like, I want to go out with a bang and just rip it. And then the weeks and the month that followed, evaluated it. My NFL projection came back from the league as maybe a mid rounder, third rounder, whatever, and thought, okay, I can go back to school and let me see, if I can improve that. And instead of having Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf go 1-2, maybe I can do more. And went back to school, and the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And really, that's where my loneliness kicked in. That's where some tough nights and tough moments and tough quiet and tough failure to have to really overcome. Had not had a lot of that through high school and in my first couple years, a lot of winning, a lot of great players, a lot of success. But that year was our first non-winning season, and I think we ended up 6-6, non-winning season in a long time, where expectations were high. My draft value went from first pick to ended up in the third round in a deep QB class. Yeah, I had to look in the mirror and handle a lot more adversity that season than I ever had in my life for sure.
Did you give any thought to how freely you played in that Aloha Bowl, kind of taking the weight off of your own shoulders versus how maybe tense or tight you were the following year with those outside expectations? And I think a
Did I
lot
have
of
any
times,
thought? Did I have any thought? Yeah, like every day, of that football season
yeah.
and listening to the noise and hearing the noise and my now wife and then fiance fighting frat boys in the stands who were dog cussing me, my parents that can't go into the stadium because I'm getting booed. And yeah, man, it was pretty overwhelming. At that point, Washington national title in 91, expectations were there. 72,000 filled that stadium every Saturday. And yeah, all this hype and Heisman and wanting the first pick in the draft and just watching it crumble. It was not thought, it was living it and living that adversity on a daily basis.
So, how did you respond to that? What was your emotional regulation system like? Who did you lean on? Parents, family? Did you shoulder it, a lot of it yourself? What got you through those micro moments? Because I know how lonely it is walking from one side of the campus to the other, and all you've got is your mind. So, what got you through those moments and got you to go back to that building to show up to practice day after day with all that on your shoulders?
hmm Yeah, I would say faith first and foremost. That element of it, thankfully, came to Christ my freshman year of high school. That was real. Had real moments throughout high school, and that was probably the not probably that was the realest moment of all. I had a fiance, Molly, again, now my wife. We got engaged in September of that year. We were married in May, right after the draft of that year. She's right alongside for that entire journey. So when those wedding vows were for better or worse. It was a lot of worse of that season. Family, friends, people that have been there before, youth pastor, campus pastor, everybody that you lean into because you realize no man is an island, just was not built. I've never been built to be a loner. And the worst thing you can do is be alone, in my opinion. So it was surrounding myself with people to build you back, to love you, to encourage you, that are there, win, lose, or draw. And know in the end, maybe not in that moment in the windshield of life, but knowing in the rear view mirror that this is going to benefit you over the long term in your life. And it certainly did.
Yeah, yeah, that's just great perspective, and it's true. Nobody wins alone, whether that's in sports or life. You
Nope.
got to have somebody to lean on because it's just fascinating that most people who show up to watch college football, they don't understand what's going through not just quarterbacks' minds, but all the stuff that goes into it. And now you're seeing a little bit of it. Last night, me and my son watched the first episode of the Any Given
Hard knocks.
Saturday story, the SEC
Oh,
on
the SEC.
Netflix. It's that doesn't even do it justice fully. It's
No.
a different world, but also wanted to just touch briefly on your NFL career because injuries were a big problem. That's the one thing, that's the one opponent that none of us can really defeat ultimately. That's something we can't do anything about. And just talk me through those moments of finally getting there and living the dream and stepping into that world, but getting pushed
Mhm.
back again with another bout of adversity. What was that experience like for you overall?
Yeah, you look back now and you're like, "Man, I'm so thankful for the Matt Hasselbacks and the Trent Dilfers and the Tony Dungies and the Jim Zorans and the amazing people that you built connective tissue with then that still 20 years later you have relationship with now." It's just and that's the game, man. That's the game of life. That's the game of football. It's the beauty of the game playing quarterback is you do build you may be the only one playing and it may be lonely, but you get to build so much connective tissue with everybody around you. So to go again, be drafted by my hometown team, the Seattle Seahawks, who I grew up watching, to get a chance to play high school, college, and pro within 45 minutes of each other was a blessing and a curse. There's points that I look back and go, man, what if Brian Billick and Ozzie Newsome on my pre-draft visit to Baltimore did what they said they were going to do, and that was take me at 42. Right? They were really blunt and said, "Listen, half the organization wants Dante Culpepper at number 10, half want Chris McAllister, the corner out of Arizona, who I competed against at 10. If we take McAllister, we're going to take you at 42. If we take Dante, we'll play against you and wish you the best." And 42 came, and I waited by the phone, and it didn't ring. And they ended up trading for Tony Banks from Michigan State, who started his career in St. Louis. And I did and have thought, no regrets. Life has been ordained the way that my Lord has seen it every step. No regrets whatsoever. But I do think, what if I would have got out of the fishbowl of home and went to Baltimore, Maryland with that defense, that run game, that crew of people? What would it have looked like? But instead, stayed home. The John Kitnas, the Matt Hasselbacks, the Jim Zorans, all the amazing people. We had amazing ministry on that team. It was awesome. Get traded to the Colts 2 years with Tony and Peyton were unbelievable. To this day, the amount of football that I talk, even coaching now, but on my radio show that I learned in watching one of the greatest to ever do it and Peyton play the position was phenomenal. And then go back to Seattle, bone spurs in the back, just a brittle back situation that ended and say, okay, move along. You fooled me for 6 years in the NFL. Now move along and get to the rest of your life, Colin. Again, in the rearview mirror is a pretty darn sweet life experience.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. Everything happens for a reason. I have those thoughts too. It's hard to avoid them, but everything happens for a reason, in my
Yep.
belief. So, how do you transition from Brock the quarterback or Brock the athlete to a more than holistic identity as a human being? I wrote a book on this subject. I think it's a subject that athletes suffer with a lot more than is even talked about. You go from this one thing and having all this affirmation and on the back and feeling like your whole identity is tied up. And not for a lot of guys, it's better today, but I think for a lot of guys, not even seeing the end coming, believing that it's so far away when it's actually a lot closer. So, what was that transition like for you? And how did you start to look at yourself differently once your career ended?
Yeah, I'm thankful, Bill. I was just at this little function and we were chatting about it before. We taped here up in Alaska and with the AD at Washington and one of the owners of the Seattle Kraken, neat guy that I knew from my days with the Seahawks. And he said, "You've reinvented yourself a couple different times." And I was like, I don't feel like I have, but I guess, yeah, from football to real estate to media to coaching now, I guess I have. And I would say, and it's the same thing now doing this morning radio show for 17 years, and I'm around a lot of radio people, and that's their whole being, right? It's their whole identity. It's just that's we've been around a lot of athletes that the whole bucket of their life is their identity as a football player. And even though I grew up with it and my dad coached it and I've been around the game and it's fed every day of my life, my livelihood really, for all these years, it just never, thankfully, was my identity. There was always this left-handed middle child, a different outlier in my family. I mentioned my saving faith in junior high, and I never felt like, yep, my identity is Brock Huard, the quarterback. Yep, my identity is Brock Huard, the morning radio host. Yep, my identity is Brock Huard, the college football commentator. That's not it. And I've had a wonderful wife. I've had a wonderful pastors and church. I've had amazing discipleship and fellowship with other very strong men in that regard. That this isn't your identity. It's what you do. It's not who you are. And I think to your point in centering around figuring out who you are, you got to do that first. Because if it becomes what you do, you become a pretty broken vessel. And I think we've both probably experienced that with people around us in our lives.
Yeah, 100%. Very well put. You mentioned the broadcasting as well. So you've stepped away from that. Now you're coaching your son's high school football team, which is so exciting. And I know that's probably going to be the most rewarding, quote unquote, profession that you ever take on. But I'm curious, in your time as a broadcaster for Fox Sports, because I did some of this myself, how did you balance the criticism with the empathy for the players? Because firsthand, what they're going through and how hard the game is, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, I'd say, Bill, early on, I never thought about that because I was just trying to grow in the craft. I was trying to grow in relationship with coaches and my teammates and my broadcast crew. And so I would say early on, I really didn't think about the player end of it that much. I wanted to be the best broadcaster and teammate I could be with my play by play partner and my producer, and really try to, because I watched Todd Blackledge and Kirk Herbstreit do this really well for a dozen years at ESPN before I went to Fox. And when I started, I was like, man, I'm envious of how much relationship they have, right? With all these coaches and ADs, and how do they do that? And you realize over time, like you do that by gaining trust and gaining equity and relationship with them. It's not something handed. You earn that over time. So I spent probably my early years really trying to do as much of that as possible. And then I will say my later years, and maybe it's having my kids compete. My daughters were student athletes as basketball players. My son is now a sophomore in high school. And I probably became a little more tender to that. And even on broadcasts, I remember there was this little slot receiver from Oklahoma, and he was a true freshman. He caught this little bubble, makes this amazing spin move, and burst down the sidelines. And early in my career, I wouldn't have said something like, wow, imagine what his parents are feeling right now. Imagine what his grandparents are feeling. Imagine what his high school coaching community, his first touch as a Sooner, and it is the most remarkable play of the game. That probably would not have come into this cranium at the start of my career. But after almost 20 years, those things do permeate. And you think about the person, the people, the family, the community, the coaches, all the village that help raise that student athlete to do what they're doing and try to celebrate their successes a lot more. Fox would do the same thing too, Bill, and they would reinforce. And when I made that move to Fox, maybe even a little more than ESPN, is reinforce the positive. Every play, there's typically a success and a failure, right? Doing this coaching thing now and watching our offense go against our defense, and you want both to win, you know? But you realize someone's gonna more often than not make a positive play, something's gonna go the wrong way. And so what are you gonna celebrate? The protagonist or the antagonist? And Fox did, I think, a really affirming job of let's celebrate the people making the special plays.
Yeah. And you alluded to it in that statement. These broadcasts and broadcasting, that's a performance just like playing is to a large
Hmm.
extent. You've
Yeah.
got to entertain as well as analyze. So I'm just curious, was there a moment in the booth or maybe before the game where your resilience was tested and you really had to call on some of those mental fortitude qualities that maybe you developed as a player?
Yeah, a couple things there probably, Bill, but I would say as a player too, in full transparency, that injury certainly played a role in my NFL career, but so did the challenge of trying to please. I don't think if I were an NFL GM and sat in those seats and had to evaluate and project, which is so hard to do, and the numbers tell you that in the NFL, I would really dig into the insides of that individual because if it is a real pleaser, perfectionist mentality, and I don't know, maybe you have some of that as well as a lefty and doing what you do in your life, but I know for me, when I got to that level, that year of adversity at Washington, just trying to be such a pleaser and such a perfectionist, you're gonna get ground up in the NFL. And I did,
Mhm.
really did. There was insecurities that were built from that. There was the inability to build some of the skin you needed because I just was always about trying to please everybody. So thankfully, when I got to my broadcast end of things, I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm done with that. I saw where that went. And in broadcasting, if you aim to please an audience, a fan base, your boss, you're directing yourself to failure, in my humble opinion and life experience. It's not a winning formula. And so thankfully, I think those lessons learned as a player carried over into broadcasting. And I just didn't ever do a broadcast. And you'll hear this if you listen to young broadcasters or even maybe broadcasters you struggle with, it's probably because you can feel they're trying to please a fan base or please a coach or please a player, that pleaser. And it just doesn't work. You got to cut through with your genuine heart and honesty and talent and knowledge and experience and all those other things that have got to weigh a lot more than that. So, just in full transparency, I feel like I need to put that out there. That wasn't just injuries that ended my career, it was a lot of that pleasing mentality that thankfully has been cut off at the knees a little bit in my media career.
Yeah, I can see how I made some of those mistakes as a young broadcaster in my early 20s. Think about it. The loyalty and the ties and the bonds that exist on a college football team are so tight and go so deep.
Yep.
I'm sure you have reunions even now, 30 years later. I see the guys, and man, it's just we're right back
Special.
where we were 30 years ago.
Yep.
So to go on a national broadcast with a microphone and cut people up is really difficult for a young broadcaster to do. So
Hmm.
I can see and hear and feel when I watch games what you just described. A lot of broadcasters certainly struggle with that, but that's what I've always loved about you. You have a way of cutting through, and that's why you've gotten to the point that you have achieved in that broadcasting career. And that's why I'll miss you this fall when I'm
Hmm.
watching games on Fox. But
Let me
I'm
tell you a
curious.
funny story. Let me tell you one
Yeah, yeah.
funny. You'll like this, and it happened actually in the Big Ten. And names don't have to be shared in this, but and it speaks to, hey, did you ever have a moment or a story or a time? So we did a game and pretty prominent Big Ten teams and a great game. And it was an underdog trying to beat somebody they had not beaten in a long time. And they were right on the cusp of doing it. And I had said something in the broadcast like, man, because it was like on the heels of the Seahawks and Marshawn Lynch and the Super Bowl. And I was like, they just ran it 15 times. You better, if you learn anything about the Super Bowl, feed the beast, right? And they throw it. And the guy's open. And it was technically X's and O's, a great call, but the ball gets tipped, falls incomplete, they lose. Fast forward almost 1 year to the date. I was back in that venue, in that production meeting, and the coach who I had really good rapport with and I thought relationship with was icy cold. And I was like, wow, what is going on? Like, I've done this long enough. Like, this is not good. And it's not going to be beneficial for the broadcast because I really valued that time with coaches to get insights that others couldn't get. That was our one piece of turf, Bill, when you think about it, with all these podcasts, all the stories, all these sites, all these Reddits, all these blogs. There's so much data, so much information's out there for the fans. But that's the 1 2 hour chunk that others don't get. And I get a chance to sit with these coaches and hopefully get things that no one else can get. That was always my feeling and Jason Benetti's feeling. And we prided ourselves on that. And I could tell, oh, this is not good. This is really not good. It is cold, it is icy. And the pleaser Brock as an NFL player would have just been like, I did something wrong. What do I got? But the broadcaster Brock, after a decade of doing it, was like, hey man, what's going on? And he said, so you think it was a bad call? And I was like, you know what? I am really glad that you brought that up. Let me tell you from my perspective where that comes from. That came from X, it came from Y. And no, X's and O's wise, coach, you're right. You're an offensive minded head coaching play caller. You're right. It was there, but unfortunately, it got tipped because when you throw it, more bad things can happen than when you run it. And we'll agree to disagree. I didn't make that personal. I didn't rip you. I didn't say what a dummy. I can't control the narrative after my analysis that's taken on in the city. Like, that's just me doing my job in that moment. And you know what? I think he respected it. He's fair. Let's go. And we kind of rebooted and started the meeting. And pretty neat life lesson there of just hitting that adversity head on.
But isn't it fascinating, Brock, how tough these coaches are who operate in the toughest environment on the planet, in the toughest sport on the planet, and yet they can be some of the most sensitive individuals. It
They
fascinates
can.
me.
Yeah.
I played for the toughest, hardest guy there is in Nick Saban, and
Yep.
I saw different instances and practices or in games where he reacted in much the same way. I'm just fascinated by the psychology of that. I don't think we're going to solve that problem here today, but I just thought I'd make that note. So, speaking of being around all those coaches, you were around all the great ones, and you're right that those meetings are legendary because they are so exclusive. So, I'm just
Yep.
curious, is there one story or one message from a coach that stands out that made you stop and go, wow, that is way beyond coach speak. That is a guy that can really cut through everything and mentally jump inside the heads and the minds of his
Mm.
players and really have them react and perform at a higher level because of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. I would say just generally, it's pretty amazing. When I started doing games for ESPN in 08, 09, some of those environments were pretty hostile. I had another coordinator yell at me because I was like, I'm seeing your quarterback. It looks like a fair amount of check with me, right? This was before the technology and the tape was really good. We're watching TV copies. I'm recording them. And he literally looked at me and said, are you serious right now? I'm like, Yeah. He's like, you think I'm going to tell you what our check with me's are? Do you know how hard it is to win at this school? And I'm like, no, I'm not asking for any of that. And so some of those environments early on were pretty shallow. They were at times fairly hostile. But I would say, Bill, by the end of it, almost 20 years in, and I'm sure some of this is just my question asking and my temperature and my years of doing it and them watching and listening to the broadcast because they do. When they say they don't listen to the TV, they do because they want to hear what's being said to their recruits and to their boosters, and they go back and they listen. And I would say by the end of it, It was incredibly rare to ever find that. Most are really trying to market and tell the story and want to connect with you because you are their mouthpiece for their program for 3.5 hours on a Saturday. And that's incredibly valuable marketing in this day and age. So a lot warmer. Geez, I think if you had Blackledge and Klatt and Herbie, and you had a bunch of us on, or just emailed us and said, hey, give me your 5 best coaches in production meetings. 5, 10 years ago, there'd be a lot of, yep, oh, it's this, these same characters. Now, most of them are pretty good. Lincoln Riley, when I had him at Oklahoma versus USC, a big evolution. Realizing like, I got to share, I got to tell my team story. Herbie and I sat at a Pac 12 function in the spring one year and basically, I don't say call out. Here's what your peers are doing in the SEC and the Big Ten, and what you're not doing. You're not telling your story. You're not sharing the fruits of all of your labor. You're not allowing us to do that as your mouthpiece. So I don't know if there was one instance, but just collectively, the understanding of, hey, this is how we build rapport. This is how we sell. This is how we market what we're doing. And if you don't do that, you're probably not going to be a head college football coach very long. And your guy, Saban, by the way, one of the best. When I had 3 or 4 Alabama games in my career, it was, hey man, Don James stories, right? It was going back to how Don saved my career, going back to the Aloha Bowl, and that's why he did an amazing job last year on the set of game day. Yeah, man, it's in him. As a player, you probably didn't feel that in the mid 90s, but now you realize it was in him all along.
That's why I didn't really get exposed to him a lot in the recruiting process. It was an interesting situation because he was in the NFL in the playoffs with the Browns. But that's from what I've heard why he was such a great recruiter
Yeah.
because he could connect with people on the couch. And I tell people this all the time. I've always looked at him. Of course, he's the greatest college football coach of all time, but I also think he's one of the best CEOs in America across any
Yeah.
industry because he can do all these different things so well. And some of them are unexpected. You wouldn't see it coming like what you just described. Total agreement on that as well. Now you're retiring from broadcasting. Maybe not retiring. Maybe we're just taking a
Just a
pause.
hiatus, just a hiatus.
Hiatus for good reason. So you're jumping into this world of coaching with your son's football team in Colorado. So a lot of kids are growing up today differently than you and I did. They're coming up at a different time. They're looking for instant gratification. I had to wait till I was a redshirt junior to play. They're looking for external validation. So how do you plan,
Mhm.
if you've given this any thought, to coach them in the mental side of things beyond the X's and O's in terms of all those things that are not X and O related?
Yeah. I would say, and there was a young coach on the staff a year ago at the school, really young coach and a really neat guy. And he had done some training with some of the QBs and receivers. And as I was finishing my obligation in my final year of my Fox contract last year, I reminded him, and especially with my son who was going to be a freshman then, I said, man, just if anything, my dad's and my coach's desire, my heart desire is to just equip him from the inside out. All those things you talked about, all those outside forces, all the social media, all the connect Instagram, all the things that they do bombarded with. I just want him equipped from the inside out. So that when I drive, and we're only about 8 minutes to the school, and I drive over there for practice every day, I do kind of remind myself, let's build these kids from the inside out. Let's make sure that identity is not them as the Valor Christian quarterback or running back or star receiver. It's what they do. It's their worship. It's how they go out and glorify the Lord and use their talents and go play, but can't be their identity. And so that would probably be right at the center of it. And I'll tell you, Bill, already, and it's been a few months, and the season will bring ups and downs and adversity and all that. But it's so neat to feel kids gravitate towards that. They want that. Sure, they're different generation, but they're not different than you and I in the 90s that still want that like heart training, right? They want the substance training, that want to be empowered, instilled to build fortitude. I think there's a podcast called Fortitude, and it's still done, I think, in 2025. Really, if you strip it down in many of the same ways as it was done in 1997 from the inside out.
So if I'm riding in the car with you and I'm your son or maybe one of his teammates, and the question is asked of you, what Coach Huard, what does fortitude actually mean to you personally? How would you describe that, and how would you give that piece of advice in that situation?
Mm. Yeah, you run the race to win and you go after it and you fully attack it. And in the game of football, Romans 12 is, and I reminded the boys the other day because it's hard. Football is hard. This is not golf. Golf's hard in its own different way mentally. This is physically so demanding, and you're going to be stretched in ways that you never have. And if you talk to any of us old heads that got to live out our dreams and do it, everyone's going to say the same thing. Just listen to Tom Brady talk about, hey man, when I was a sophomore, I'm not getting any reps at Michigan, and it's hard and it's physically grueling and brutal. And that fortitude is just to persevere, right? And they're analogous. Where's your perseverance built? If it's built on the external, if it's built on the praise of others, if it's built on trying to please others, if it's built on trying to please the social media realms, you will never have internal fortitude and perseverance. So offer your body as a living sacrifice. That's Romans 12:1. You get to do it in football in beautiful ways for others, for yourself. And yeah, and perseverance and fortitude, man, they're married together. Go attack it.
I love it, man. We will end there. But before we go and before we wrap up this very special episode of the Fortitude Forum, now that you're not in the public eye anymore, where can the listeners and followers continue to follow your journey, Brock? Whether or not you ever come back to the
Mhm.
broadcast booth, or maybe you end up on Sundays coaching the NFL, where can they keep track of everything you've got going on in the future?
Yeah, so I don't do the gram or any of that. I'm not good enough there. But Twitter, thankfully, our radio station, we jumped into that years ago. So I Brock Huard on Twitter. You can find a lot of my stuff there, fun there, pretty open book. The morning show at Seattle Sports is also on the app every day, and it's amazing how many people find that all over the world and listen to it. People that have gone from Seattle and elsewhere. I'm really proud of that. Mike Salk and I, you want to talk about fortitude. When I started with my partner, two different worlds colliding, not a lot of love, zero success. And over almost 17 years now, we built a pretty special thing in the morning. You can find that at Seattle Sports, Brock and Salk Show, and over there on Twitter, Mr. Burke.
Awesome, man. I wish you and Valor Christian all the best this fall and beyond. Thanks so much for doing this, Brock.
You got it, man. What a pleasure.